last session of the day. Apologies for those of you hoping that Nick would be here. Our colleague from the Catapult, Nick, unfortunately is ill, and so she'll take part in the conference, and she was really disappointed because I think she would have found it an absolutely fantastic couple of days and would have been delighted to have met you all in the room and to have learned more about what we're doing. But so I'm Nick's asked me if I'd be interested in sharing this, so I've been delighted to accept that. So hopefully I can help take the what's been discussed prior to me coming on and have a really good and interactive discussion on the needs of industry. So our 5 panel members here are from a variety of different organisations. We've got representatives from large pharma, Malcolm at GSK, Jens at AZ, and then in David, William, and Mark, we've got people who are, developing new startups and trying to get things off the ground, whether they be in the AI space or in the therapeutic space, or in David's case, an innovative CRO offering services to others. So we're looking at it from the perspective of these different. Just so the panel, we're hoping to explore really what's on the horizon for aging research, translation of that into industry, and the movement of that toward the clinic. What are the challenges and opportunities ahead for the types of companies which are represented here, and how can those work better together? And hopefully are there roles for UK Spine in helping achieve that aim? So what I'd like to do first of all is open up to the floor to each panel member and give us a few minutes each, if you don't mind, about yourself, your organisation, and what your organisation is kind of doing or thinking about with respect to ageing and multi-morbidity. If you don't mind, Malcolm, can we start with you?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for staying. It's very kind of you. Many of the things I was going to say have been said over the last day and a half, but I'll reinforce them. And I apologise for the gender imbalance on the panel, which I've just realised. Yeah, so I'm not an expert in ageing, even although I'm getting old, so I'm taking a more active interest, like many people. See, ageing is a natural process, so it's very, very different. I sat in the regulator conversation earlier today. What's the gold standard, when you're looking at comorbidity study, and who's actually going to pay for that? I mean, that's going to be the real nettle that we have to grasp. I do think that data, I mean, we've heard a lot of stuff about AI, machine learning, big data sets. There isn't 2 days go by where I don't have a conversation with someone in my own organisation about accessing data or AI and machine learning experts. I think that some of these studies will be retrospective, like the study they've just done that's just been in Lancet Longevity Journal, where they looked at 200,000 individuals with cardiometabolic problems, one of 3 stroke, obviously being one of them diabetes, ischemic heart disease, which is, even COVID times was the biggest killer in the world. They looked at that and how many people then went on to develop dementia. And what they found was that out of the 200,000, that 20,000 had at least one of those conditions, and then 2,000 had 2, and then 122, I think it was, had 3. And there was a clear correlation between that and whether or not this was 60-year-olds, all of European ancestry. So you didn't have the ethnicity issue you had to worry about. There was a clear correlation between that and developing dementia. Now, they're the sorts of things that, now we've got UK Biobank, and we've got Our Future Health, and we've got all those wonderful data sets being generated, which is a real, frankly, sink for foreign direct investment coming back into the UK. I would suggest, if we are open and transparent and not greedy about that, if we make that anonymised data available to the companies that can use it, then you can look for those correlations. I mean, because the obvious thing there is, well, healthy heart, healthy mind, earlier detection of those cardiovascular insults and diseases and earlier treatment, and then you keep people out of the care homes, out of the hospitals for longer, which has to be the way. So it'll be data, it'll be noisy data, it'll be the Fitbit stuff, it'll be the electronic health records, but it'll be a mashing of that data, because even unless it's high blood pressure, and Christ, you've got to get that sorted out straight away, it'll be a mixture of all the mashing of that data, which will give you an index of how healthy you are and how old you are. So yeah, I'm a great believer in big data. I used to go cycling with a bloke who used to be the chief exec of Dunnhumby. And for years, they've been looking, for decades, they've been looking at Tesco club card data. And it's probably about 10 years ago that over a pint, we were talking, I tried to get people at GSK interested. It was a time when Tesco's were putting little shops out of business and buying up greenfield sites. And, so their PR wasn't great at the time. But, can you imagine if you had all of that club card data, so you knew the family's profile, like they send us vouchers for this and that because they know your profile. They know if you've got babies or not. They know if you drink too much wine. If you had that information and you married that up to the health data, just how powerful that would be. But we need the social scientists to actually help us get there, because at the moment the public isn't ready for that. So anyway, I'm rattling on too much. I'll leave it there.
Brilliant.
That's why I haven't got a club card. Hi, I'm William. I'm science founder and CSO of 5 Alarm. And if you want to know what 5 Alarm does, look at the 30-second intro on YouTube, because it took me hours to do. Okay, so that's enough of that. So 5 Alarm Bio is a startup. It's my 5th startup. And Tina said the start optimism is correlated with longevity. So I think I've got a life expectancy of about 150 years, because you have to be an incurable optimist to do a startup. I think for me, the biggest problem, I'd love to have the problem of how do we get hold of and analyze data. At the moment, it's how do we get hold of money? And even as a university spin out, 5 Alarm isn't. 5 Alarm's a sort of de novo, make it up in a pub startup. Even the university spin out, incredibly difficult to get from I've got a good idea that could be applied to having enough data to attract serious investment, serious farmer interest in taking it forward to something deployable. So perhaps we'll talk about that a bit more, but I can rant on for quite a long time on the subject of investors. In fact, I've written an 80,000 word book on the subject of investors and what bastards they are. But we'll pause at that point.
Great. I don't really know how to follow on those two. My name is Mark. I am co-founder of a startup that was started in Argentina. So maybe that's one differentiator. It's not a good one, generally speaking, because it's great here, especially if you're talking about a life science business that started somewhere close to Oxford, Cambridge, or London, right? The golden triangle is where startups come from, especially from here. So one of the big challenges we've had, along with the money thing, which goes hand in hand, is the validation piece. I've been doing startups for about 10 years, both as starting as a mentor, then becoming an advisor, then becoming a co-founder, then starting my own, then investing in a few. That's not a good way to make money unless you're really, really lucky. So I also invested in a fund or two that invest in startups. That's a little bit better because you diversify the portfolio and you tend to get lucky with a few of them, and you also get to see a lot of different startups. So it was a great way for me to do I won't call it a PhD, but some kind of master's in entrepreneurship, which I also do. I teach entrepreneurship and innovation at the University of Buenos Aires, but I'm now for the last 2 years been focused on Multiply Health, which is all about diagnosing cardiovascular risk much earlier using only a blood sample. So not like Theranos, it's not a pinprick, it's an actual vial of blood, because we need a lot of RNA. But I think it is part of the future to get this kind of service to be much more universally accessible, and a lot of the boundaries I think that were talked about in the last 2 sessions.
Thank you. Jens.
Yeah, my name is Jens Kickbusch. I'm an associate director at AstraZeneca in the Emerging Innovations Unit. And the remit of our team is really to look for technologies, ideas, and collaborations that have an impact on the business and on patients on kind of a 5 to 12 year horizon. So big pharma is very good at looking 3 to 5 years in the future. We have our pipelines, we know exactly what the gaps are, what the risks are, how we mitigate them. But there's very few people to really look further out. And I'm part of that rather small team. And it's really through that lens that we look at aging at the moment. It's clearly something that chimes well with some of those mega trends that we are seeing, aging society and multimorbidity. But it's really something that presents unique challenges for the traditional big pharma model and the way we develop new therapeutics. And we can discuss that a little bit more, I think, in this session, where exactly those challenges are. But yeah, I'm here to learn and to listen and to really see what others are doing, especially in the academic but also in the startup space, and how we as a pharma company can really engage with that going forward. I have a background in immunology, did quite a few years of bench research after my PhD, then went into a more business-focused role with the Wellcome Trust. I looked after product development there for vaccines, and also some of our bigger partnerships with UK and European academic institutions. And now last year, I started at AstraZeneca in this role.
David, thank you.
My name's David Weinkove. I've got several roles. I'm an academic at Durham University. I'm also recently chair of the British Society of Research on Aging. Thoughts on the aging landscape in the UK. But I'm on this panel because I have a startup company called Magnitude Biosciences. I'm the CEO, and we actually provide services to many companies that are trying to develop therapies or other products to slow aging. We're outside of the golden triangle actually, and I think one of the reasons that maybe related, but our investors are more interested in us having like a revenue stream rather than developing IP. And I think that is quite a good way to develop things. You interact with the client base, and you learn a lot of things, and you build things. So we have a lot of, I think I get a good view of what's going on in terms of how people are trying to develop, interventions to slow aging, because the companies we work with did that. William is one of them, and this compound looked pretty good when we tested it. But most of our clients are actually in the US or other parts of the world, so I think that says something as well about where the strength is in this field. That's something that needs to be addressed. I think it's challenging, obviously, we said, I think it's been discussed lots of times, it's challenging to develop drugs to slow aging. It's sort of indication of aging not being recognised by FDA and other regulatory authorities, so you have to take a different route, and that's either age-related disease or using looking at things like supplements and looking at those from a consumer output. The other one that's another strategy that one or two companies have taken is looking at compounds that slow aging in dogs, because the idea is that that dogs are very short-lived really, and people are very invested in them, and there's lots of money to train someone to guide a dog. And the idea is that if you can show that you can slow aging dogs, then people say, "Oh, I want some of that," and then it would change the focus, and people might think again differently. So that's just another strategy.
Okay, well, thank you for those introductions, and here's some quite diverse reasons to be engaged in this area. So we heard about money quite clearly, William. I think that's a key grease which is going to oil most wheels of entrepreneurship in some way or other. But I think perhaps if we could initially start off thinking about some of the technical challenges that each of your organizations is facing and moving moving forward in the aging space. So we're focusing mainly, I think, in UK spine around therapeutics, but you've also touched on other areas. I mean, clearly, Mark, you're in the kind of that digital diagnostic kind of space, and Malcolm, you were talking about the use of data etc. in those. And I think data seems to underpin a lot of the background to each of the innovations that are on the table here. So could you perhaps bring out a little bit more for the audience what you think are some of the, the key challenges that we're all facing in terms of, moving new ideas, products and services more towards some commercial outcomes, and how you might want to, how you might want to affect change, or what you're currently doing about it. So if you'd like to go first, or if not, I'll just choose somebody.
Well, I can
Please
start quickly. One of the big things that we ran into is very early on, we were using data sets that exist. And if you look at the data sets that exist, there's very few that have to do with cardiovascular disease in terms of large data sets of RNA-seq. And so one of the big things we had to start doing was to collect our own data, and that costs money. So back to the money thing. I think the next stage, we've done most of our clinical trials in Latin America because it's a lot cheaper and that makes it fundable. But there's a great lack of diversity. I'm not sure if you knew, but Argentina is an entirely white European background, basically. So very, very little diversity. And one of our decisions to come to the UK and establish the company here was the diversity of the source of the data. And the challenge then becomes, how do you partner with people that can help you do the clinical trials and fund those and start to build this database that you can use to develop the products for a much more diverse population, which I think is a general issue across any data-driven business. We're still, a lot of research, at least to my understanding, is very male and white male focused. And we need to change that if we're going to have products that are effective for the much broader population. So diverse data,
diversity in data, diversity in access to that data. What, if you don't mind me just building on that, what impediments are there to getting hold of that data and then using it?
To hold it and
to getting hold of it in the first place.
Well, I think it's largely a funding issue, because you can hire crows and you can run clinical trials to get them. So there, for a very early stage, like we are, a lot of it has to do with validation that you could get from different parties. In our case, we went through the Illumina program at Cambridge, and then KQ Labs, which helps a lot because they are great at introducing you to partners and potential clinical partners as well. We were also doing quite a lot of work with an organization called MedCity, and they put us in touch with QMAL in London. We're doing a grant with them, which is all about a really diverse data set to study the polygenic risk score, and if we can add to that using our technology. So it's all about really having the connections and the validation as a really young startup in a situation where you don't come from the background. I think I mentioned that at the very beginning, but I think it all kind of hangs together around having the connections and then the willingness from the other side, or the motivation from the other side to work with these small companies that still don't have a huge amount to offer, other than just lots of energy.
Thank you. What about the perspective of large pharma? I mean, Jens, how's that doing this?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the key problems that prevents more engagement, I think, is just that there's an inherent disconnect how big pharma is set up in terms of drug development and what you actually need to address an aging population. Right? So through decades of successes and failures, I think pharma has become quite good at knowing at each stage gate, from preclinical all the way to patient impact, what needs to be in place. Right? And ideally, what we're looking for new projects is that you have a clearly defined patient population, you have a clear target. Ideally, the target is genetically validated, and then you design your therapy around that target and show that in clinical trials. And all that obviously is not really working in a multi-morbidity, multi-morbid population where there's lots of different phenotypes and lots of different issues. So it is very difficult to address. And I think there needs to be, the model needs to change, and that will take time. And I think we're still quite far away from that. But I think that is a key issue, I guess, from even meaningfully engaging with that type of research at the moment. And I think that startups can be much more disruptive because they don't have the same constraints. They can just run with an idea because they don't have these frameworks in place through decades of experience. And I think that's a real benefit here.
Yeah.
I think it will take a lot of time. Products are on the market and you can really see the patient impact. I think that change may come rather quickly then. But at the moment, I think we're so far away from seeing how that could actually benefit patients. It's quite difficult to convince people internally to take on that extra risk and the opportunity cost that comes with it. Because if we are pivoting to a lot of kind of aging related indications now, obviously we need to take away from other projects, and that ultimately we're serving the patients. So there is a risk there as well.
Yeah.
I would disagree with that a bit. I mean, in theory, startups can be disruptive, but in practice, I mean, as in the case of 5 Alarm, and I should say about investors, we have got 2 investors who are fantastic people and are backing us. Okay, so not every single investor is bad, but many of the ones we went to, I said, you know, we got this underlying fundamental approach to multimorbidity and aging, and we've tested out in David's fantastic C. elegans model, and we got this fantastic data. And they said, what specific indication are you going after, and what is the recognized mouse model you've tested it in, and have you done a CRISPR knockout of your target? And the answer is, you mean have we knocked out the genome? No. And without, so they won't give us money. We go to pharma company, you said, well, you won't give us money until we've latched into your process, and so we're sort of stuck. And so you end up with this sort of what a colleague of mine used to call prostate funding, which is, you know, enormous amount of pain and effort for a very tiny amount of output. This is why we founded Alarm. In 2016, and we're still here looking for seed funding. So it's to say, well, you need to sell your project to a drug company. What are they going to want to buy? They're going to want, you know, well-known target, CRISPR knockout, blah blah blah, and you haven't got that, and so they won't buy you, and so we won't give you money. And it's, well, okay, go and die of old age then.
That's the spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. We are making slow progress, but it's incredibly difficult to find those very, very small, you know, a handful of investors will back the anti-aging play. Most of those are in the US, most of them are in California. And we did seriously think, let's just go to California. What can I say? You know, I'm a miserable old fucker.
Persistent.
Very
and
persistent.
optimistic.
And actually optimistic, yeah, because I do think we can make it. I do think we can make a difference, and I do think ultimately we'll produce something. But you know, we've had to recast the business plan, saying we're going after these diseases, and you know, one of them was sarcopenia, and people said, well, yeah, sarcopenia, you're going to dose, you know, 5,000 old people in old people's homes for 3 years. That's never going to happen, is it? Can't do the clinical trials. Pharma won't buy it. We won't invest.
There is a massive gap in early funding, and there's organizations like LifeArc that are starting to potentially fill the gap, but there's myriads of funders that say that they're early stage, and I haven't really encountered a real early stage funder, because generally speaking, as a startup, you're just too early for them. So then you have to rely on people that are called angel investors, and they're called angel investors for a reason, right? Because they just have faith in the team. And but really the issue for me then becomes, what kind of money do you need to do these more deep science projects? And you're talking about a lot more money. You know, you're talking about millions, not hundreds of thousands, and that creates then another kind of disconnect. And so it's a real dilemma, and it's a frustrating one. And but good luck with that. keep going. Persistence is the other one, right?
We'll keep going. Yeah. But I think to come back to your question, I think this is where organizations like UK Spine can really help, because there are academic groups that can provide, I can't buy, RNA-seq machines and confocal microscopes and things like that, even if we get good investment. But there are academic groups that have that sort of resource and can do some of the underlying science to underpin what we're doing, and we can then go on and say, look, we've got all this stuff, and we've now got the the knockout this and the transgenic that data in a collaborative relationship. So that's what I'm keen to come along to these sort of things.
To be fair to the funders, so the report that Michael referred to, the BIA report, showed that last year was the biggest ever year for life science investment, 4.5 billion. Whereas the year before that it was 2.6 billion. We had a couple of really big outs with obviously Oxford Nanopore and Exscientia.
Yeah.
But there was money floating around last year in spite of COVID.
Yeah, well, Oxford Nanopore largely funded by money from the Far East in its first 3 or 4 investment rounds. And I think they'd had over 150 million invested. Over.
You only take UK funding?
You do.
No, will you?
Yeah. No, I'll take it from anywhere. But
Well,
I
exactly.
have to go out to the Far East to find the wretched stuff. Yeah. I mean, we've gone to funders all over the place. But early stage therapeutics is tricky. Nanopore said we're going to sequence DNA. Everybody likes sequencing DNA. We're going to do it better and faster. And that was a pitch that they could, and they spent a long time struggling to get money. I know, because I talked to them many years ago.
And that could be absolutely, that could change the whole landscape.
Yeah.
If you have
cool. I'd buy one.
So going back to your challenges, I mean, I think there's a real challenge. We are getting bigger and bigger data sets. I mean, I heard somebody say something internally, one of our senior blokes said that last year we generated and curated more data than we had in the years before. I thought, well, that can't possibly be true. I went back to the guy who runs AIML and he said it is true. So that's how quickly it's ramping up. It's like that death curve we saw last night, when you get to a certain age. We haven't got enough. People don't think about our industry as, they all think about deep minds and Amazon, IBM sorts for program. They don't think about coming to us. And then when we get them, because they're in such demand, even GSK is struggling to keep hold of some of the good people. So it must be even worse for research institutes who perhaps don't pay quite so much. A little bit same as engineers. People don't think about, I say I want engineers, I always think Rolls-Royce and BA Systems. So I think as the data sets get bigger, and it's absolutely in this space. So the other paper that came out this month that I saw on our intranet was the one from UK Biobank, David Tuff, who some of you will know. David Tuff and a guy I didn't know from Biobank put out on looking at 600,000 cells, looking at T cells changing in response to insults, and looking at them individually, so that rather than normally when you have those pool of cells and it kind of blunt the edges, you're actually looking at the real thing. You need that level of granularity to see where the pathways spread. I think they got 117 genes that were involved in the various things they were looking at, 114 it might have been. I mean, that's the level of data, and that's just one set of researchers. If you scale that, then it has to be data driven. And people can have their little ideas and see where that fits in the overall jigsaw. But at the end of the day, is a very small part of that jigsaw. So yeah, I think data's going to be the thing, and diversity. Everybody uses the same annotated data sets to train their algorithms, and sometimes they're really quite tight and they're not diverse enough. So you need bigger, better annotated data sets, and then it will get stronger and stronger. But it will happen.
In aging, we've heard a lot about the mechanisms, the fundamental mechanisms which seem to be driving aging, and just thinking then about how we test things and translational models. So what does an innovator need to do with respect to translating their ideas in aging through to something which is acceptable for development by perhaps a partner organization, such as a pharma or to get VC backing? Because these are, you ultimately want to boil them down to quite simple binary outputs, but perhaps these are not, they're not there yet. What do you think we could do in this space? I mean, David, you might want to so I have some comments on that.
I mean, obviously
Worse.
unbiased, yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the stage you are in the platform, because obviously, you know, testing aging in mice is an expensive operation. That probably, you know, there hasn't been any talks, as far as to my knowledge today, in this conference, of people actually using aging mice, because there are very few. There are maybe I missed a few, maybe, but you know, I mean, it's quite an expensive and difficult thing to do. But I think obviously that is where you need to go. Where we can help with C. elegans is, you know, the earlier stages where you've got a bunch of different compounds or interventions in order to find the ones that are most promising. I think it can, in some circumstances, be useful to use C. elegans to find out which ones is more likely to work in vivo early, you know, looking at that early. But I mean, I think many people are trying to look at, you know, the data and so on, looking at human beings. Well, can we just go straight to humans and see if we've got some sort of clock or some sort of way of measuring aging in a relatively short time? Can we see that? But obviously you need to have an intervention that is approved to try on humans. So that also has to go for all the safety. And I think that's the other thing that I think we need to think about. And it's not just a question of the indication. It's also that if you're going to have a therapeutic to slow aging and you're going to give it to healthy people, then it's got to be completely safe, you know, over a long period of time. So it's a much higher bar maybe than for other compounds that are targeted to much more kind of intense diseases. So safety is the other thing that I think is another challenge on that. And then again, you can use models to do that, but I don't know what the other guys think.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about models or translation?
A model I was quite interested in a while ago, we didn't have funding to follow up, is killifish, which is a natural lifespan of between 3 and 6 months and is a vertebrate. So you've got a gradation from, you know, sort of yeast for basic molecular biology through model like elegans, so multicellular animal, through killifish, but then when you get beyond that, you say aging mice, it's very expensive, and you start to ask, are you actually developing a drug to treat aging, which you say is a huge bar for safety and toxicity to overcome, or are you developing it for a specific indication, in which case you might look for a model in mice, an older mice of that indication, but you're testing specific indications. So yeah, anybody else have thoughts on killifish? Not really. Killifish? No. No.
I think it is. You're like you say. I mean, they are probably the shortest lived vertebrate that you can work with. So people are developing those. So it sounds sensible to me. You know, but not. I just don't think it takes a while to have an established model. You know, and these models need to have a lot of work to work out the genetics and the ways to look after them and all that kind of stuff. So it requires a lot of investment to get those kind of models really working in a way that people can use them for general drug discovery.
And I guess once the first products hit the market, you can kind of back translate and see which models were most predictive of their success.
Exactly,
right? And
yeah.
I think that's when you kind of emerge with models that are really recognized in the field, but we're very far away from that.
Exactly, and I think that's what comes. You know, we always get asked, "Is C. elegans a good model for this kind of thing?" And the only real way we could show that is if a drug that we find in C. elegans then eventually turns out to be useful in people. You know, and hopefully William will be there, but others will do that. But with him, there are several examples where people have found drugs that slept, but you've got to go the whole way, and then you build up those case studies and you build up those methodologies, and it's not going to be work for every single intervention, but there might be some that do.
So we heard about investment and things. I was just wondering if we just change gear a little bit and think about investment and what that means for a startup in particular. So what do you think needs to happen in the UK to encourage more investment in this space? We've all noted, you know, significant sums going into from investor houses and other places in the States. One or two, you know, huge examples, but also, you know, plenty of smaller companies starting. And I just wonder if there's there's an appetite for investment, which is different in the States compared to the UK, and also is there something around the culture of entrepreneurship as well in the States versus perhaps the UK, which is different. Just thinking what your thoughts are in this area. Malcolm, you.
Well, it's true that, I mean, having a failed company in the US is just like doing your PhD. It's just the next step. Whereas if you have a failed company, or as many as Williams had, you might as well go and hang yourself. But I think it's changing. I mean, we did overtake San Diego. Yes, only a region, but it's a big region. We overtook San Diego last year in terms of the money raised. But we're still miles behind Boston, San Francisco, and the stuff that I read about China. It's really interesting. Mainland China was third, and they had the highest. They had 5 top journals they had the most CAR T cell trials, and they were top in 5 of the journals. That's the competition. And it's not, Durham against UCL. So you have to look at, and big, wherever you're headquartered, and we're headquartered here, thankfully, so AZ, but your global organizations, in fact, you're going to go where you can get science at scale. So GSK bought, several years ago, bought equity in 23andMe to access the data, and before Jennifer Doudna got a Nobel Prize, we were interacting with them, and that, decimal point on the amount of funding was higher than here, but it's scale. And that's how it is, and the data is being generated at scale. So how do you fit in that? You're going to have the smart ideas. I mean, my whole job is about working with bright academics around the globe, and I always say that my internal battles, whatever frustrations you have, my internal negotiations with people are far bloodier than anything I'd ever do with any of you lot. So it's the truth, and I will fight on behalf of, and budgets will come and go, and I'll see the continuity. I mean, the one thing is, I've got acquaintances, friends, colleagues, contacts in academia who don't move a lot. I have a file, a Word document with names of people I forget on my computer, and that the organogram changes so rapidly in our industry that I know the microbiome expert for this, and I know that, and I go to, oh no, they've gone. Oh, who's in their team? I had somebody come up to me yesterday and said, oh, we had a really good conversation with so-and-so, but they're no longer with you. So now, and then you have to find someone else. I mean, it's a challenge. It's worth doing, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I think the scale thing is really important, actually. There was a DIT, I think it's called this week, a delegation to the Greater Boston area, got a presentation there. They said they've had, over the last decade or something, $1 trillion investment in infrastructure there. And, that's more than the UK's done. And if you want lab space, there's lab space. And we're trying to find lab space around Cambridge and Cambridge, UK, and it's really tight. And people aren't building, multi-billion pounds worth of more lab space. It's all small. And there's benefits to small. I don't think just having lots of stuff for the sake of having lots of stuff is good. But yeah, be able to say we now want a bunch of scientists, we now want a bunch of data, we now want a bunch of smart AI people. Where are we going to find them? Certainly in Boston. And yeah, you look at the Nature rankings of top universities based on publication research output. China, just powering away there. And the UK is dropping down the list.
But it's not doom and gloom, because what we have got here is we have got the ability to pick up the phone to any PVC for research, any chief executive of any of the funding agencies, and we almost are like the biotech country. We are much closer. Half my team sits in Philadelphia. If they try and have the conversations, and I encourage them to, that I have, it's almost like they're manipulating public purse funding rather than trying to collaborate. It's a completely different mindset, unless it's for a biothreat, in which case everybody steams in and wants to fund it.
I guess the big thing I would add is, so I think scale is extremely important and really pivotal in the US. One of the things that scale does is it helps portfolio risk, right? So what it has led to is a much bigger appetite for risk taking in the US by VCs because they also have many more projects to invest in. And what you just said, Malcolm, is really important. We chose the UK in part because of the fact that it's a great place to start small. I think the big question that we're running into now, and our plans are currently to move to the US to try to monetize earlier. So, and to David, I'm interested in your view about how to get customers on board, because the best way to fund a startup is obviously customers, because you're not seeding any equity and you're learning about the product, and so that's a way to get there. And I think that's much easier to do in the US than it is here. Whereas here, I found the ecosystem, whether that's UK Spine or these organizations in London, like MedCity, like London and Partners, like many others, are really amazing at putting you in touch with the people that can help you at least get to clinicians or get to people that you wouldn't have a chance to get to necessarily if you're in Boston as one of 30. Here you're maybe one of 5, and somehow that helps. So there's good and bad things, but I think it's a risk appetite thing. I mean, that's a cultural thing, and entrepreneurial drive is just, I think it's something that but the scale thing is also going to impact the benefits that China has. China just has access to data that none of us will ever have, I don't think. And we have to compete with that somehow.
But you mentioned the US doesn't help with the stickiness that, you know, the likes of George Freeman's trying and
That's right.
and we've had, and some rapidly developing areas. I mean, cell and gene therapy, they would have thought Stevenage would have been a hub of centre of excellence for cell and gene therapy, but they've had a Boston-based company actually relocate, you know, for the manufacturing at Stevenage. So they're the cameos that we need to put out to people. So it's not just a place where we have smart ideas and it gets hived off and we get prostituted somewhere else.
That's the challenge.
Jens, what's the view of another farmer, another large farmer in the space? You know, how do you view things like, you know, helping the smaller companies? You know, we're not investing much in the UK, so how can a farmer perhaps think about impact investment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from an investor point of view, we are not very much engaged with that, but we try to foster an ecosystem where that can happen. So we have a mentorship program, AZ Exchange, where we, wherever our R&D footprint is greatest, we support smaller companies. So that's one way we do it. But yeah, investing is not really part of our mission, I guess, to foster that sort of environment. But I mean, part of why we moved to Cambridge is exactly that, right? Because we really recognize that in order to thrive and in order to innovate, you need to be in an ecosystem where that is being facilitated. So we do make most of our co-location with the university, also with Cancer Research UK and many other organizations, including startups. And we have lots of collaborations. And I think this way of collaborating, and I think it kind of dovetails with the last talk a little bit. I think many academics don't necessarily realize how willing Big Pharma is to collaborate, even on projects that are very far away from any actual products or from any patient impact, very discovery research type projects. And we have hundreds of those collaborations in Cambridge and across the country, really. And they're very valuable for us, and we hope also for the academics who are involved in it.
Thank you. David, have you got any thoughts in this area about you know, investment and how we can stimulate it in the UK?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think aging is one of the, you know, that Andrew said last night. You know, the amount of funding that you need is such a big problem, and the amount of funding that you need and the amount of return that you could get on that is huge. You know, and so, and because things have to be done at bigger scales. You know, you can't do because the heterogeneity that's built into aging. You have to do your experiments or your trials with big numbers, you know, so the whole thing is big, and it's also multiple cell types and multiple things you're looking at, so it's just bigger than many other sort of disease questions, so you do need that, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure if I think you're right. I think William made the point about the investors are thinking about, the investors like sort of the traditional biotech because they think, well, okay, that some of them will make it and then get bought up by the bigger company or licensed to the bigger company, so they can see that model. And that model hasn't been made yet in aging. And so the investors in aging in the US are not really doing it. Most of them aren't really doing it in the same model. Some of it, they're just doing it out of like, they just think it's a cool thing to do and it will invest money, and they haven't really got that plan. They're much more kind of like, yeah, we must do this. This is going to be massive. We have to invest. Let's do this. And that's their kind of like, and they're not, and they're not really thinking about this kind of like, oh yeah, we'll do it, and in 5 years we'll sell it or something like that. And that it can't really, because so it's a different mindset. And maybe in the UK we have to look at other sources of money rather than investors to begin with. Like government funding and so on. But I think also, the question of revenue and our model of getting revenue from actual, it keeps you, make sure that you're actually serving what the clients want, and it makes you really kind of like honed to what you need to do. And I don't know whether we're quite small. We're a very small company, but it would be great if, theoretically, you could grow purely through revenue, theoretically, if you have big enough clients and enough stuff coming in, and hopefully it'll come back in a few years' time and tell you how big we've got. But
I would make one other quick one about investors. I mean, the last speaker talked about proximity, and investors like proximity as well. So, yeah, I mean, we did talk to several Californian investors, and they just were not interested, partly because we were very early and partly because we're in the UK. And so very early next door, they could come around, they could look you in the eye and say, yeah, I trust that guy, he's great. I can't do an accent, obviously. But 8,000 miles, 6,000 miles away, you just don't get that proximity and interaction. So perhaps, we should ask George Freeman MP if he could find some way of bringing a bunch of California investors over here. Get that, yeah, let's do it because it's cool.
We're bringing the California investor over for the BSRA meeting, 12th to 14th of September. Anyone's interested?
Thanks, David. Tell me more. Yeah. On that, I'd just like to perhaps invite some questions from the audience. Harriet.
Thank you very much. I wanted to pick up on the diversity question. So first of all, Malcolm's point astutely recognised that we've done very badly with this panel in terms of diversity, and it was something we did try, and we had several people lined up, and then for various reasons it didn't work out. So we note that. But is that actually a challenge specific to this area? Is this representative actually of what is going on, or is it just that we've done particularly badly today? And if it is, how does that attend, Mark, to your question around diversity in the data? Because presumably there's a possible relationship between the people that are doing the stuff and the questions they're then potentially asking, or the evidence they're gathering, and is that part of the problem?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't think it's a problem in our case, although we are 3 male co-founders, and we've talked a lot about this. The lab where we were founded is 80% women, so why don't we have any of the women that were whatever part of the founding team? We do now. We did just hire a woman to start our US business. So the whole concept of diversity is a core principle. It's also part of this universal access idea that we have. But I do think that that's an internal cultural thing, and the data thing is something about where you get and where you run the trials and how you run the trials. And what we've seen in Argentina is that the population is simply very heterogeneous. So especially in terms of ethnicity, you're going to have real big problems getting diversity. And then gender diversity hasn't been a problem for us from a data point of view so far, but it is on the ethnicity, and that was one of the reasons for coming here or going to the US, just because of the kind of diversity that you have. If you look at the rest of Latin America, there are companies that are more interested in indigenous populations, so they'll go to Mexico, Peru, and countries like that have large indigenous populations. Brazil has very few indigenous populations, and it has a huge African origin population. So, I think startups like ours that are looking for diverse data sets, we are thinking about it. But a place like the UK, I think is ideally suited, and there's a lot of grant money and a lot of support to access that. So I haven't seen the problem here in the UK. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but that's really the reason for being here.
Any other questions? Quite a few over there. So I think right at the top of the stairs first, and then I've got Chaz after that.
This isn't a question, it's more of a comment and might be of interest to William and Jens. But last half of 2021, my laboratory set up an African turquoise killifish facility at the University of Swansea. And the first half of this year, we've spent most of our time characterizing proteostasis across lifespan and between sex in the killifish. And I think it's probably one of the hottest new models that's available at the moment. I think that in the UK, we maybe are the only colony that's ongoing at the moment. So if you are interested, there's two things we need. One is collaborators, and the second, of course, is funding.
Okay. Next funding round for you,
UCL as well.
Chaz. And then I think more at the top of the stairs.
We've heard a lot about money and space and scale up as being challenges, but I wonder if a challenge we've got here is around communication. I mean, the fact is the way the industry is working at the moment is, they tend to work on a single gene, single target, single disease, single assay, single biomarker. And as Malcolm touched on at the start, we know what the gold standard treatments are in that disease area, so we know what the comparator is. When we're talking about aging or, this discussion here, it's multiple diseases. We talked yesterday about possibly 10 different pathways. We don't know what the biomarkers are. We don't have the assays. We don't know the regulatory challenges. The clinical trials are going to be very difficult, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm not at all surprised that pharma or the investors are turned on. And even in this meeting, we talk about aging. Well, I don't know what we mean when we say we're going to treat aging. I can understand if we say we're going to try and tackle multimorbidity or we want to reduce polypharmacy. I'm certainly in favor of increasing health span. I do not buy this argument about we're trying to increase lifespan. So if we paint a confused picture, it's not at all surprising that pharma investors are not going to bite. And so I think we need to get a very clear narrative amongst ourselves. And I said in an earlier session, I didn't agree with the after dinner speaker yesterday who was talking about curing aging. I don't think that's going to happen in the next century.
And maybe on that, I think it's going to be interesting as well how other players fit into that, like Altos Labs, for example, who just opened in Cambridge as well. How that kind of third party that you don't have in many other areas, I guess, will kind of influence the way things are going, that they're really looking at aging through a commercial perspective without clear product development plans. And what that will do to the whole field, I don't really think is clear at the moment, but it's certainly going to be interesting.
Can I say on terms of this, even there with what you're saying, I think Andrew last night was equating aging with mortality and not aging as in functional decline or other things that can happen with age, and the onset of multiple morbidity. So I think this conference is called, isn't it, health span, not lifespan? I think that is really clear. We have to be really clear about that. That's what we want to do, is say, slow aging, that's the way to go, whether that may or may not have an effect on lifespan, but that's not the goal, so I think that's really important. It's something that we're very clear about in that way we approach things. But I think you're right about, you have to have a clear narrative and you have to have a clear story that the investor's going to buy into, and there are people buying into that in the US, but maybe not in other places. So we have to improve that. I agree.
Yeah, no, we're quite explicit. We want to extend healthy lifespan, extend health span. I think that will extend lifespan because if you don't die of something, then you're still alive. But the primary goal is health span.
I also say that, I mean, I know us academics always like to whinge and complain about the competition. And I appreciate that in China, there's masses of resource and they've got massive scale in the hospitals and they can do clinical trials with tens of thousands of patients, etc. But actually in this country, we have a pretty phenomenal National Health Service.
Yeah.
And we do need to better exploit it. And then in terms of the funding, again, as academics, we like to whinge about funding, etc. But actually, my own belief is that money is pretty fluid. I mean, sort of, you know, if there's an investor on the West Coast, if we have a good idea here, I think they will put the money here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they are, I think there are definitely examples of that in this field. So, and actually they see West Coast, you know, US investors see European companies as kind of half price, you know, because they're much cheaper to invest in the US.
changing, right?
So
I think it's been
there's
changing
an
over the
opportunity,
past
you know, so.
But it depends what you mean by a good idea, because we talked to one US investor and presented the elegance data that we got from Magnitude, and they said that's fantastic, really good data. Love the model, it's a great model. We like the data, really nice. We're not going to invest. You're too early. So, well, okay, but we're not academics, and we can't go to an academic grant to get to the next stage. So, and you know, I'm not that getting academic grants is easy. I do appreciate that. Yeah, there is money for good ideas, but it depends what you mean by good idea.
Okay, I think on that note, we need to hand over to Harriet to wrap up, but could we just thank our panelists for their insights?